Hello, Philip Lennon, and this is for Poli-Sci 610. The topic I'm going to be covering today is countering the rise of China as a superpower. So, before I get into the details of the policy recommendations I'd like to make, I first want to cover what exactly China is as a threat. So, just to sum up the threat of China, since the last 30 years, China's economy has continued to double in size at roughly a 9.6% growth annually. This growth in economy has allowed China to expand its influence on many fronts. First and foremost, currently undertaking the Belt and Road Initiative, which is designed to enhance land and maritime lanes of communication for commercial shipping. This is throughout 71 countries. This would definitely give China a strategic foothold globally. With the growth in economy, China's been able to invest internally in their infrastructure, domestically, as well as develop their global reach through their military advancements, specifically the development of aircraft carriers, submarines, stealth aircraft, defensive missile order of battles, and the development of man-made islands in the South China Sea. Furthermore, this advancement in military to try to reach some sort of parity with the United States or to surpass the United States' capability, they add to the fact that since adopting Western free market, open market principles, the country itself has not moved towards a liberal democracy. They've actually strengthened their hold as a one-party state, and China seems determined to remain communist, one-party state, very Chinese ethnic orientated, which means they have zero interest of integrating into the liberal democratic world, which a significant part of the globe operates in. So now moving forward to looking at what current U.S. policy is doing and where it's succeeding and where it's failing. Right now we have the Trump administration, which was inaugurated in 2016, so it's still relatively new to see what kind of success and even failure that their policy is having. But nevertheless, they have identified China as a strategic rival on two fronts, especially which would be economic and military. Addressing the economic side of the house, U.S. runs a $375 billion trade deficit with China. In an effort to counter that, the United States has placed over $200 billion worth of tariffs on Chinese goods. In return, China has applied their own tariffs to U.S. goods, which has essentially caused a tit-for-tat trade war between the two nations. Additionally, China has expanded their military capabilities to include aircraft carriers and advanced stealth technology, but most significantly is they have developed man-made islands in the South China Sea, which has expanded their footprint in that region. These islands have been now observed for military purposes, building of runways and missile systems placed on the islands. This has caused a lot of concern for several other nations in the region, specifically Vietnam, Philippines, Japan, Australia, are all concerned about this growing Chinese military presence. So what has the U.S. done to counter this? They've conducted freedom of navigation operations with their allies. To some extent, this has not deterred the Chinese for continuing to develop these islands. Furthermore, it's actually caused increased interactions with their military aircraft, with shipping vessels, and with U.S. military aircraft. So, in the South China Sea in particular, we're seeing an increase of tensions. One that could be potentially a tipping point for hostilities. So at that aspect, I would say that the current policy has failed to address China's expansion. So what are some recommendations that I'm putting forth that we could address to tackle those issues? Well, first and foremost, and it's kind of tied in with economic but military at the same time, is improving relations with countries we otherwise wouldn't have had good relationships in the past few years. For instance, the political rhetoric coming out of the election between Russia and the United States probably, I recommend, should be tamped down, and we should work harder to building a relationship with Russia economically and even possibly militarily in joint terrorism operations. The reason being that China and Russia, I feel, have been pushed closer together due to the political rhetoric between the U.S. and Russia right now. But Russia and China still distrust each other. They both have significant forces aimed on each other's border that have nuclear capabilities. So, despite what we're seeing about joint economic efforts and joint exercise, they still remain leery of each other's intentions. And I think this would be a good point for the United States to exploit. On that same note, China's had past issues with Vietnam. We have had past issues with Vietnam. But recent port visits by U.S. naval vessels to Vietnam has opened the door to improving relations with Vietnam. Now, we could do this militarily and economically, which would, one, allow us to, again, expand our influence in that region as well as counter Chinese expansion, as Vietnam is very concerned about Chinese intentions. And these can go along with Russia and Vietnam. You can add the Philippines, you can add Japan, you can add Australia and India, all concerned about this. So, one way to put pressure on China is with these same countries, not just militarily improvement, let's do economic improvement by building bilateral trade relationships and deals. We can use some of these countries as new manufacturing export points for the U.S. by diversifying our demand on Chinese products, which would ultimately lower the cash flow for China coming into their country. Now, when you apply that with the continued tariffs, that's going to put significant downward pressure on Chinese economy, which is already kind of suffering a slowdown in the recent world economics. Now, the second part is we need to continue to maintain a military dominance in the region and globally. So right now we roughly spend 3.14% GDP on our defense industry, which is essentially which is more than 7 of the next country's combined annual expenditures. So right now we're still far superior to the next 7 countries, but if we again focus on specific areas such as cyber, space, and nuclear weapons, these are the areas where we need to continue to surpass China and maintain a dominant role. This will ultimately serve as a deterrence for the long run. Additionally, if we reprioritize our spending that we're doing in overseas operations such as in Afghanistan and Syria, we could bring that money back into the fold and apply it to those same focused areas. Now, what happens if we fail to implement these policies? Well, what's going to happen is China's probably going to continue to be undeterred and will expand militarily in the region. And then when you look at the military expansion tied with the economic expansion, this will put the U.S. in a tough position. Essentially, it would likely push the U.S. out of the Asian Pacific region. Long term, because if you look at their initiatives for BRI, this could potentially leverage the United States out of other areas of interest that we have. For instance, they're looking to expand trade to South America, where the U.S. has in recent times had a strong foothold, but is starting to see a decline in popularity. China could take over there. But when you add all this together, building a military on parity with the U.S., surpassing a U.S. economy, if all these come true in the next 20 years, let's say, the U.S. is going to be at a disadvantage, almost to the point where China could then use that leverage against the U.S. economy to push whatever agenda they want within the globe. There are many variables still left to be determined, but ultimately the U.S. would be at a disadvantage if we don't start taking policies to challenge China's position in the world. Thank you.